I never imagined betrayal could wear such a familiar face. When I looked at her, my best friend of 40 years, the woman who held my hand when my husband died, I never saw the serpent that would later slither into my home. My name is Evelyn. I'm 78 years old, and I've lived a life full of faith, loss, and quiet grace. But nothing prepared me for the day I realized my own son had been turned against me by the woman I once called sister. It all began after my husband, Charles, passed away 5 years ago. We built everything together, the old house, the small vineyard behind it, and the business that kept us afloat. Charles left me a comfortable inheritance, one meant to secure my twilight years and help my son, Daniel, when I was gone. But grief has a way of blinding people. I thought my greatest comfort would come from my old friend, Margaret. Margaret and I met in our 20s. She was bold, loud, and charming, the kind of woman who could make an entire room laugh while I quietly poured tea in the corner. We balanced each other, she the flame, I the calm. When Charles passed, she was the first to show up, wearing black and carrying homemade pie. She stayed late every night, helping me sort through Charles's things. I thought it was kindness. I thought it was love. I didn't see the way she lingered when Daniel came home from work. Daniel was 35 at the time, handsome, responsible, and heartbroken over his father's death. He had always been a quiet boy, sensitive beneath his strong jaw and kind eyes. I remember one evening in particular, it must have been early autumn. The air smelled of rain and old earth. Margaret and Daniel were sitting on the porch, laughing at something I couldn't hear. When I came out with tea, she brushed a strand of hair from her face and said, "Evelyn, your son's grown into such a gentleman. You must be proud." There was something strange in her tone, too soft, too admiring. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was overthinking, that grief makes the mind suspicious. Weeks turned into months. Margaret became a permanent fixture in our lives. She helped with the bills, offered to cook, even started managing small things around the house. I was grateful. Truly. My arthritis was getting worse, and having another pair of hands felt like a blessing. But one night, I woke up to the sound of faint laughter from the kitchen. The clock read 2 a.m. I crept downstairs quietly and froze in the doorway. Margaret and Daniel were sitting too close, whispering, their hands brushing across the table. I didn't speak. I simply turned back upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. "Sleep well, darling?" she asked, handing me my coffee with that same painted smile. Daniel avoided my eyes. Something inside me cracked that day. I wanted to ask him what was going on, but a mother knows when her son won't answer. So I waited. 2 weeks later, Daniel came into the sitting room with Margaret standing behind him. "Mom," he said softly, "there's something we need to tell you." My stomach dropped before the words even left his mouth. Margaret and I were getting married. For a moment, the world blurred. I remember the ticking clock, the faint smell of jasmine from her perfume, the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. "Married?" I whispered. "She's old enough to be your mother, Daniel." He flinched, and Margaret stepped forward, her voice calm and honeyed. "Evelyn, love doesn't look at age. You, of all people, should understand that. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, to make her admit what she was doing, but instead, I just sat there, numb. My best friend, my son, my home. Everything began to crumble that day. The wedding was small, held at a courthouse. I didn't attend. Daniel said he respected my decision, but his eyes were cold. After that, Margaret moved in officially. She changed everything, the curtains, the furniture, even the way Daniel spoke to me. The warmth between us faded like morning fog, and every time I tried to talk to him, she was there, whispering in his ear. Then one afternoon, I overheard them arguing in the study. Daniel's voice was tense, almost desperate. "You said you didn't care about the inheritance," he shouted. My heart stopped. I stood outside the door, listening. Margaret's tone turned sharp. "Don't be naive, Daniel. That house, that land, it's all wasted under her control. Once she's gone, it's yours, ours." I stumbled backward, pressing my hand to my chest. My best friend had married my son to get to my inheritance, and my son, my sweet, loyal Daniel, had fallen right into her trap. I didn't confront them that day. I carried the weight of those overheard words like a stone under my tongue, letting it keep me silent while my mind sharpened around it. When you reach my age, you learn that anger is a wasteful fire. Quiet is the blade that cuts true. So I watched Margaret move through my home with the confidence of a queen. She rearranged the china cabinet, labeled the pantry, pretended to worry about my arthritis. She pressed vitamins into my palm every morning, little chalky things in a plastic organizer she'd bought to help you remember. I didn't take them. I kept them in a porcelain bowl in my nightstand because something about the eager way she watched me swallow felt like a hand on the back of my neck. Daniel, my sweet boy, changed in front of me. I saw it first in his shoulders, the way they stiffened when I spoke, the way he glanced at her before answering my questions. He came home later and later, and when he did sit with me, he talked as if I were a client, not his mother, measuring every word. "Mom, we need to discuss the property taxes," he'd say, eyes sliding away. "It might be easier if I manage your accounts for a while." I asked him why. He said he wanted to help. Margaret stood in the doorway, smiling. The study became their kingdom. Once, it had been Charles's room mahogany desk, the leather chair with the creak, the soft smell of pipe tobacco that never entirely left. Now they kept the door closed. I noticed new files on the desk when it opened, manila folders, red tabs, my name written in Margaret's careful looping hand. I had a key to the old filing cabinet that Charles and I used, a brass thing shaped like a lion. The lock was scratched now, as if someone had tried to open it without the key. When my friend Ruth from church dropped off a casserole, she took my hands and squeezed them. "You look tired, Evie," she whispered. "Is everything all right with Daniel?" I lied. I said I was fine. But that night, alone in my room, I opened Charles's old ledger, the one he kept for the vineyard, full of tidy columns and receipts, and I wept into the paper. He had always planned, always saved. There were notes in the margins about me, about Daniel, for Evie's rainy day, set aside for Dan's future. Charles had loved us without show, like a steady river. He would have hated what the house had become. A letter arrived the next morning, addressed to me in the tight, formal script of the bank. I slid it open with my thumbnail. Inside, a notice. Someone had inquired about the terms of our family trust. My breath caught. I'd almost forgotten it. An old document our attorney, Mr. Whitaker, had drawn up after Charles's first heart scare decades ago. It placed the house and vineyard in a trust that passed to Daniel upon my death, with provisions for maintenance and a clause about marriage under suspicious circumstances. I hadn't thought of that clause in years. Whitaker was a careful man, suspicious of everyone by profession. Now his caution snagged in my mind like a thorn. I hid the letter in the ledger and called him from the phone in the laundry room, where the old walls still swallowed sound. He answered on the third ring, voice dry as paper. "Evelyn, it's been a while?" I asked him for a meeting in town. "Discreetly," I said, and he made a small, dry noise that might have been a laugh. "I'm an attorney, my dear. Discretion is my only talent. I told Daniel I was going to the pharmacy for ointment, and I left my cane at home to make a point. The cold air bit at my cheeks. The sky smelled of impending rain. Whitaker's office hadn't changed in 40 years. Green lampshades, dust floating like gold powder in the light. He set a folder on the desk and folded his hands. "You're worried," he said. "Tell me why." So I did. Not everything, my pride still trembled, but enough. He listened without interruption, only interjecting once when I mentioned the vitamins Margaret managed with such enthusiasm. His eyebrows rose. "Don't take anything she gives you." "I haven't," I said, and for the first time in weeks I felt a small flicker of something that might have been courage. He pulled the old trust from the folder. "Your late husband had a knack for anticipating storms. The house and vineyard are held in trust with you as lifetime beneficiary," then to Daniel. "There are protections here if your mental capacity is called into question, if someone exerts undue influence, if a spouse," he glanced up at me, "enters the picture under questionable timing." My hands trembled on my lap. Can they force a change? Can they take it from me while I'm still alive? Not without your signature and a clean bill of cognitive health. He leaned back. "We can make this harder to tamper with. A medical assessment establishing your competence, a trustee co-signer on any major changes, a notification requirement for any bank inquiries." He paused. "Evelyn, do you want me to do this?" I pictured Margaret's smile, the way she'd stood behind Daniel like a puppeteer, fingers invisible but sure. I thought of Charles's ledger, his notes in the margins like little love letters. "Yes," I said. "Please." On the drive home, rain began to patter on the windshield. I took the long way through the vineyard, where the vines were sleeping, their arms black and bare against the pale earth. I had walked these rows with Charles in every season. I could trace them with my eyes closed. Near the far fence I saw a truck I didn't recognize, the kind contractors use. A man climbed out, checked his phone, then headed toward the back of the house with a purpose. I felt the sting of panic and parked by the barn. Inside, the old light swung and clicked, bright and unforgiving. There, beside the shelves of oil cans and garden tools, hung the heavy hook we used to hoist barrels. I remembered its weight. I remembered what it felt like to be strong. I didn't take the hook. I took a breath. The contractor was in the study when I came in through the kitchen, measuring the wall where Charles's safe sat hidden behind the portrait of the vineyard on harvest day. The portrait had been moved off-center. Dust marked the outline of its original place. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice as mild as milk. He jumped, then forced a smile. "Ma'am, I'm here to install some shelving. Miss—" Margaret ordered them. His eyes slid past me to the hall, as if seeking her approval even in her absence. "I don't recall asking for shelves," I said, and his smile faltered, but he kept working. I didn't tell him to stop. I simply stood there, a little old woman with a gentle voice, while my mind began to draw lines between points. The bank inquiry, the hidden safe, the contractor, the vitamins, the arguments behind closed doors. Margaret had a plan layered like pastry. She wasn't just marrying my son to inherit later. She was chiseling at the foundation now. At dinner that night, I brought out the stew Ruth had left and set 3 bowls on the table. Margaret came in last, phone in hand, face flushed with whatever conversation she'd been shepherding. She kissed Daniel's cheek with a performative tenderness and sat down. "Contractor came," she said casually, spoon pausing midair. "Finally, we'll get some order in that study." I looked at her placidly. "What's wrong with the way things are?" She smiled with all her teeth. "Nothing, darling. I just like to see things where they belong." Daniel didn't meet my eyes. He ate quickly, then excused himself. Margaret lingered, tapping her spoon against the bowl with a soft, irritating clink. "Evelyn, I've booked a doctor's appointment for you next week. Just routine stuff, memory, reflexes, all that. You've seemed forgetful lately." The spoon's rhythm matched my heart for a moment, then went out of sync. I folded my napkin carefully. "How thoughtful," I said. "I'll be ready." She tilted her head. "You don't have to be scared. They're friendly, these doctors. They understand aging." She tried to make it sound like comfort, but her eyes betrayed impatience. A test she wanted me to fail. That night, I counted the pills she'd given me, I wrote down each letter on the label and copied it into the margins of Charles's ledger. Then I tucked the little organizer back in its drawer as if nothing had changed. In the morning, I would call Whitaker again and ask him for a name, someone independent, trusted, someone who couldn't be nudged by a woman with a bright smile and a persuasive tone. I would make my own appointment and bring the results to him, and he would lock them with the trust and layer the house in protections until Margaret's nails bent trying to pry them free. Around midnight, I woke to a soft thud downstairs. The house holds sounds like memories. Certain creaks belong to certain steps. This one came from the study. The heavy, reluctant sigh of the safe door when it moves on its old hinges. I slipped my feet into slippers and wrapped myself in Charles's cardigan. In the hall, the air felt colder, like a draft sneaking through a crack. The study door was ajar. Light bled a thin stripe across the carpet. I moved like a shadow, slow, patient, letting the boards take their time under my weight. When I reached the door, I could see her inside, Margaret. Hair loose around her shoulders, spectacles perched low on her nose, the portrait lifted down and leaning against the desk, the safe yawning open like a black mouth. She was bent over a folder, her fingers moving with intimate knowledge, and for the first time I saw her without performance, without charm. There was nothing kind left in her face, only hunger. I didn't gasp. I didn't make a sound. I stood there long enough to know this was not a guess, not a fear dressed as certainty. This was truth. Then I stepped back, quiet as a moth, and returned to my room. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the wood. In the morning, I would begin. The next morning, sunlight spilled through my curtains, soft and deceitful. The world outside carried on as if nothing had happened. Birds chattered in the vineyard, the postman hummed down the lane, and somewhere downstairs, Margaret's laugh cut through the quiet like a knife dipped in honey. I sat on the edge of my bed, my fingers curled around Charles's cardigan, and whispered to myself, "Not today, Margaret, not this time." I spent the morning in silence, letting her believe I was frail, tired, unaware. She brought me my tea, just as she did every morning, and smiled that saccharine smile. "Drink up, love," she said softly. "You've got your doctor's visit tomorrow, remember?" I looked up at her, meeting her eyes for the first time in days. "Oh, I remember," I replied. "Every little thing." She blinked, uncertain whether it was a remark or a warning. After she left the room, I poured the tea into the potted fern by the window. The plant had been withering for weeks. Today, I'd know why. The liquid soaked into the soil, leaving a faint chemical smell, not the earthy scent of proper tea leaves. My stomach turned poison, slow and polite, hidden in comfort just like her. I dressed carefully that day, choosing the lilac shawl Charles had bought me on our 50th anniversary, a little reminder to myself that I wasn't dead yet. When Daniel came home that evening, I greeted him with warmth I didn't feel. His eyes softened briefly before Margaret called from the kitchen, and the spell broke. He followed her voice like a dog to its master. After dinner, while they watched television, I slipped out to the porch with the old rotary phone I'd kept hidden under the cushion of the wicker chair. I dialed Mr. Whitaker's number. "It's time," I said when he answered. "She's moving fast." He didn't ask for details. "Be at my office at 9. Bring whatever you can prove." But how could I prove anything? The pills? The tea? The safe? Every move she made was wrapped in innocence. Yet something told me she wouldn't stop until my name was erased from everything Charles and I had built. That night, I pretended to sleep. Through the slit of my eyelids, I saw the door ease open. Her silhouette glided across the room, the faint light from the hall glimmering off her hair. She leaned over me, close enough for me to smell the faint trace of her perfume, vanilla and rot. I held my breath. She adjusted the pills on my nightstand, her fingers steady and deliberate, then slipped out again. When dawn came, I wrapped the pills in tissue and slipped them into my pocket. After breakfast, I told Margaret I was going to take a short walk to clear my old head. She smiled sweetly, but her eyes flickered. "Take Daniel with you," she said. "He worries." I lied smoothly, saying Daniel had already promised to meet me later. The path to town was quiet, the air heavy with dew. I stopped by the small clinic on Maple Street and asked for Dr. Lewis, the physician Mr. Whitaker trusted. He was a gray-haired man with kind eyes, the sort who believed age did not equal confusion. I told him everything about the pills, the tea, the tests Margaret arranged, and the changes around the house. He listened, his jaw tightening. "Let me test what you've brought," he said, taking the tissue bundle. "We'll keep this between us." I left feeling lighter, though my heart still raced. Outside his office, I found Daniel waiting by the car, arms folded. My breath caught. "Mom," he said, "what's going on? Margaret said you've been acting strange, sneaking out, making calls." I smiled faintly. "Oh, Mother isn't allowed to make calls now?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "She's worried about you." "Oh, I'm sure she is." The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Mom," he said firmly, "she loves you. She's been taking care of you when you barely leave the house." I stared at my son, at the way his brow furrowed just like his father's once did, and realized how deep her poison had run. "Daniel," I said softly, "just promise me one thing if something happens to me. Don't sign anything. Don't sell the house. Don't trust anyone who says they're doing it for me." He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" I touched his cheek. "Just promise." He hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. I promise." That evening, Margaret acted as though nothing had happened. She cooked dinner, hummed, even kissed Daniel's temple in front of me. "You're quiet tonight, Evelyn," she said, ladling soup into my bowl. "Worried about the appointment tomorrow?" "Not at all," I said evenly. "I'm actually looking forward to it." Her spoon paused midair. "Oh, yes. I'd like to know just how sharp my mind still is. You'll come with me, won't you?" Something flickered across her face. She hadn't expected that. "Of course," she said eventually. "Wouldn't miss it." The next morning she drove me to the clinic herself, humming cheerfully all the way. I watched her reflection in the window, the slight twitch of her jaw, the way her fingers tightened on the steering wheel when we passed the road leading to Mr. Whitaker's office. She was nervous. Good. Inside the clinic, she tried to check me in herself, but Dr. Lewis appeared immediately. "Ah, Mrs. Bennet," he said warmly. "Come right this way." Margaret smiled too widely. "I'll wait outside." He closed the door behind me and whispered, "It's confirmed. The pills contain sedatives strong enough to impair judgment." My hands shook. "So she—" He nodded grimly. "She's been trying to make you appear unfit." My throat tightened. "Can you put that in writing?" He handed me a sealed envelope. "Already did. From the clinic, I went straight to Mr. Whitaker. We filed the report with the authorities and added a clause to freeze any changes to my estate until further notice. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was armor. By the time I returned home, the air inside felt heavier. Daniel wasn't there. Margaret stood by the fireplace, her phone in hand, eyes dark. "How was your test?" she asked sweetly. "Oh, enlightening," I replied, setting my purse down. "Turns out my mind's sharper than ever." She didn't blink. "Is that so?" "Yes," I said softly, walking closer. "And the doctor found something interesting in those pills you've been giving me." Her smile faltered for the first time. "What are you implying?" I leaned close enough to smell the sour fear beneath her perfume. "That I know everything." For a moment, the mask slipped. Her voice dropped, low and venomous. You old fool, you think you can stop what's already in motion? Daniel trusts me more than he trusts you. Maybe, I whispered, but the law doesn't. Her eyes widened just slightly, then she turned and walked away, calm as ever. But I saw it, the tremor in her hands, the tightening around her mouth. The battle lines were drawn. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in 40 years. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed like thunder, and somewhere beyond that door, I knew she was plotting her next move. And so was I. The night passed heavy and long. Every creak of the floorboard, every sigh of the wind against the window made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep. I watched the dark like it might answer me. When dawn finally came, I felt older than my years, but sharper too, like glass under sunlight. I'd spent my entire life believing goodness protects itself, but Margaret had taught me otherwise. Evil doesn't always come roaring. Sometimes it comes wearing your friend's perfume. Daniel left early that morning for the vineyard. He said there was a problem with the irrigation, but I knew Margaret had sent him away. She needed him gone. She came into my room later, carrying a tray of breakfast eggs, toast, and tea that smelled faintly of lemon and something metallic. She smiled her same flawless smile. "You must be tired after yesterday," she said softly. "You were so brave, going through all those tests." I met her gaze, slow and steady. Yes, I was. And the doctor was quite impressed with me. Her smile flickered, but she recovered. "Well, that's wonderful, dear. You should rest. Let me handle things around here. I'll take care of the papers you got from the clinic just to file them properly." The audacity of her words almost made me laugh. She still thought I was the fool she'd built in her mind. I reached for the tray, pretending to be slow, frail. "Oh, don't trouble yourself, Margaret. I've already given them to Mr. Whitaker." Her hand froze on the teapot's handle. She didn't move for several seconds. Then she straightened, her voice like silk pulled too tight. "I see. That was smart of you." "I've learned from the best," I said gently. For the first time, she didn't smile. She just looked at me, really looked at me, like she was calculating whether I was still worth pretending for. Then she turned, heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor, and left without another word. I didn't eat. I packed. Only what I needed: papers, documents, Charles's ledger, and the envelope from Dr. Lewis. I placed them in the hollow compartment under my jewelry box, a little hiding place Charles had built decades ago when the world still felt safe. Then I called Ruth from church. "Ruth," I whispered, "if I don't answer the phone tonight, call Mr. Whitaker. Tell him to come here with the police." Her voice trembled. "Evelyn, what on earth—" "Just promise me," I said. She did. Bless her soul. She didn't even ask why. When Daniel returned home later, he was distracted, sweating, a smear of dirt on his cheek. "The pump's fixed," he said, dropping his gloves on the counter. "Where's Margaret?" "She went to town," I said evenly. "Said she needed to pick up some documents." He frowned. "For what?" I shrugged. "Maybe you should ask her." He looked uneasy, but didn't press further. After dinner, he kissed my forehead, something he hadn't done in months, and said, "Mom, I'll always take care of you, no matter what happens." His words should have comforted me. Instead, they broke me, because I knew he meant it, and yet he was still under her spell. When the house went quiet that night, I slipped out of my room and went to the study. The air was still thick with her perfume. I opened the safe again. She hadn't locked it properly after her last midnight visit. Inside were old deeds, bank ledgers, and now a few new documents I hadn't placed there. I pulled them out. Power of attorney forms, transfer authorizations, my signature forged in perfect imitation. I felt my blood run cold. A sound came from the doorway. "You shouldn't be in here, Evelyn." Her voice. Calm, low, dangerous. I turned. She stood there in her silk nightgown, eyes gleaming in the dim light, a glass of wine in her hand, looking through private things. "Are we?" "These are my things," I said quietly. "Not any more," she murmured, stepping closer. "You had your time, your control, your little kingdom. But people like you never know when to step aside. I gave you every chance to rest gracefully, but you had to fight. So now," she set the wineglass down on the desk, "now you'll rest permanently." I took a step back. "You won't get away with this, Margaret." She smiled faintly. "I already have." At that moment, the front door opened downstairs. Daniel's voice called out, "Margaret? Mom? What's going on?" She froze. Then, quicker than I expected, she snatched the forged papers from my hands and shoved them into her robe pocket. "Stay silent," she hissed, "or I'll tell him you're losing your mind, that you've been sneaking into the safe at night, imagining things." Her tone was venom dipped in pity. Daniel appeared in the doorway a second later. "What's happening here?" Margaret turned to him, instantly soft. "Oh, love, your mother's been confused again. She found the old documents and started saying terrible things." Daniel looked at me, then back at her. His eyes flickered uncertain. "Mom?" I took a breath. "She's lying." My voice didn't shake. "Those papers in her pocket, they have my forged signature. She's been planning this from the start. She married you for this, Daniel. For the house, the vineyard, the money." Margaret laughed, low and scornful. "Listen to her." The poor woman's delusional. She turned to Daniel, tears brimming in her eyes. "She's sick, darling. Please, can't you see? She needs help." Daniel's face twisted in conflict. "I saw the boy I raised, the one who used to run through the vineyard barefoot, the one who cried at his father's funeral, and then I saw the man Margaret had molded, trapped between loyalty and manipulation." "Daniel," I whispered, "look in her pocket, please." Margaret took a sharp step backward. "Don't," she warned, but Daniel moved faster. He reached out, grabbed her wrist, and pulled the papers free. The silence that followed was deafening. His eyes scanned the pages, then met hers, filled with betrayal so raw it cut the air. "Margaret," he said, voice breaking, "what did you do?" Her face crumbled. "I did it for you. For us. That money was wasted. Your mother would have left everything to the church or buried it in the ground." Daniel stepped away as if she'd burned him. "You poisoned her. You forged her name. You used me." She lunged forward, grabbing his arm. You don't understand. He shoved her back. Get out. Daniel, get out. His voice thundered through the house. For the first time, Margaret looked small. The fire that had burned so bright in her eyes dimmed into something hollow. She turned toward me, hatred flickering there for one last second. "You'll die alone, Evelyn," she spat, "just like you deserve." Then she stormed out into the rain. Daniel stood there, chest heaving, papers clutched in his hand. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I stepped closer, resting my palm against his cheek. "It's not your fault," I whispered. "Evil doesn't look evil until it's too late." We stayed like that for a long moment, the house echoing with the sound of the rain. I thought it was over. I thought she'd never come back. But Margaret wasn't the kind of woman who vanished quietly, and somewhere in the night, I swear I saw the shadow of her car parked across the road, headlights dimmed, waiting. I thought she was gone for good. Daniel and I spent the next few days trying to patch the cracks she'd left in our lives. He burned the forged documents in the fireplace, one by one, watching the flames swallow the lies. I saw the guilt in his eyes, the shame of a man who'd trusted too blindly. I told him what any mother would: "You're not to blame for being kind." The days felt lighter, the air clearer, but I still caught myself glancing out the window at night. The silence had changed. It felt expectant, like the calm between heartbeats before something dreadful. Margaret hadn't vanished. I could feel her out there, circling like a hawk waiting for weakness. Then, one evening, a police officer came to the door. His cap was wet with rain. "Mrs. Bennet," he said softly, "there was an accident down by the ravine. A car went off the road. The driver's name was Margaret Cole." For a long moment, I didn't move. Daniel stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Is she alive?" the officer said. "Barely. She's in St. Mary's Hospital. They said you're her emergency contact." Of course I was. She'd made sure of it. Even her lies had paperwork. That night, I lay awake thinking of her, Margaret, the woman who once held my hand through my husband's funeral, who knew my favorite tea, my childhood stories, my every weakness. How do you mourn someone who tried to destroy you? You don't. But I had to see her. I needed it, like a wound that won't close until it's cleaned, even if it stings. The next morning, I told Daniel to stay home. "This is something I need to do alone," I said. He protested, but I insisted. Some wars end only when the old soldiers face each other. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked wool. They led me to a small room at the end of the corridor. She was there, pale against the white sheets, her face bruised, one arm in a cast. For the first time in years she looked human, not the serpent I'd come to hate, but the woman I once loved like a sister. When she saw me, her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Come to gloat?" she rasped. "No," I said quietly. "To understand." She laughed a weak, bitter sound. "Understand? You have everything, Evelyn. The house, the vineyard, the sun. I had nothing. You had friendship," I said. "You had love." Her lips twisted. "Love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't keep you from becoming invisible." I sat beside her, the chair creaking softly. "You could have asked me for help. I would have given you anything." "That's the problem," she whispered. "I didn't want charity. I wanted what you had. Respect? Legacy? When Charles died, I saw how people looked at you with pity, yes, but also reverence. You were the grieving widow, the strong matriarch, and I thought, why not me? Why can't I have what's left? You tried to take it by destroying the only person who ever trusted you," I said. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. "I never meant for it to go that far. But once Daniel started believing me, once he started needing me, it was like power. It made me alive again. For a long while neither of us spoke. Machines beeped softly, measuring the fragile rhythm of her heart. Finally, I said, "You're not getting anything from me, Margaret. Not my house, not my forgiveness. But I'll say this, I pity you, because when I die, people will remember me for what I gave. When you die, they'll remember you for what you took." Her jaw tightened. "Then I suppose we both get what we deserve." I stood, adjusting my shawl. "Goodbye, Margaret." She didn't look at me again. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh, almost forgiving. I thought that was the end of it, but fate wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the hospital. Margaret had passed away in her sleep. A stroke, they said. Along with the notice came an envelope sealed in her handwriting, my name on it. Just mine. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page, her writing shaky but deliberate. "Evelyn, you were right. I took too much, wanted too much. But I couldn't die without telling you I left something for Daniel. Not money, the truth. Look in the desk drawer, the one we used to write our letters on when we were young. You'll find what I couldn't say aloud." My pulse raced as I hurried to the study. The old desk sat quietly beneath the window, dust glimmering in the late afternoon sun. I pulled the drawer open, and there, beneath a stack of old receipts, was a small brown envelope labeled, "For Daniel." Inside were photographs. My heart nearly stopped. Daniel as a boy standing beside another woman dark-haired with eyes like his. A birth certificate, dates that didn't make sense. And then a note in Margaret's hand. "He was never yours by blood, Evelyn. Charles had his affair before you married. The boy's mother died. He brought the child home, and you raised him as your own. I knew because Charles told me once, drunk and grieving, I wanted to hate him, but I understood. You never knew. You loved Daniel truly. That's why I couldn't destroy you completely. I saw that love, and I envied it." I sank into the chair, the letter shaking in my hand. The world blurred, but not from tears. Something inside me shifted, something I'd never questioned until now. Not my blood, but my son all the same. When Daniel came in later, I handed him the envelope. He read every word, silent, pale, and then looked at me with the eyes I'd loved since he was small. "You knew?" I shook my head. "No, but it changes nothing. You're my son, Daniel. You always will be." He broke, then fell to his knees, head in my lap, sobbing like a child. I stroked his hair, the same way I did when he scraped his knees as a boy. "You're my heart," I whispered. "Blood doesn't make family. love does. We buried Margaret on a quiet hill by the old church. No one came except me and Daniel. The wind tugged at my shawl as I placed a single lily on her grave. For all her sins, I couldn't bring myself to hate her completely. She was a woman broken by envy and loneliness, two poisons I understood too well. As we walked back down the hill, Daniel slipped his arm around me. "You should sell the vineyard, Mom," he said softly. "Rest." I smiled faintly. "No, my darling. I'll stay. This land has seen too many ghosts already. Someone has to remember." That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun melt into gold behind the vines. The house was quiet again, but this time it was peaceful. Margaret's shadow was gone. My husband's memory rested gently in the air. My son, my true son, was safe. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, "It's over, Charles. It's really over." But somewhere deep inside, I knew stories like mine never truly end. They linger, etched into the walls of old houses, carried in the whispers of the vines, retold by old women with trembling voices and unbroken hearts. Because sometimes betrayal isn't the end of a life, it's the start of understanding what love really means. And as the night crept in, I smiled into the quiet. I had lost my best friend, faced my darkest truth, and still found light at the end of it all. That, I thought, was my real inheritance.